I rejoin my father and brothers in Paris. My father is appointed to command the 17th Military Division in Paris. He refuses to support the ambitions of Sieyès and yields his place to Lefebvre. I had just turned 16 in August 1798. 6 months later, near the end of February, I left the College of Corrèze. My father had a friend named Mr. d'Aurignac, who took it upon himself to bring me back with him to the capital. We took 8 days to reach Paris, where I arrived in March 1799, on the very day that the Odeon Theatre burned down for the first time. The glow of the fire, visible far away on the road from Orléans, made me believe that it came from the many street lamps gathered in the capital. At that time, my father was living in a beautiful townhouse on Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, number 87, at the corner of Rue Verte. I arrived just as breakfast was being served, and the whole family was gathered. I would find it impossible to express the joy I felt upon seeing them all again. It was one of the happiest days of my life. It was the spring of 1799. The Republic still existed, and the government was composed of an executive directory of 5 members and 2 chambers, one called the Council of Elders, and the other the Council of 500. My father hosted many people at his home. There, I met his close friend, General Bernadotte, and some of the most prominent men of the time, such as Joseph and Lucien Bonaparte, Defermont, Napertandi, the leader of the Irish refugees in France, General Joubert, Salicetti, Garot, and Cambacérès. I also often saw at my mother's house Madame Bonaparte and Madame de Condorcet, and occasionally Madame de Staël, already renowned for her literary works. I had only been in Paris for a month when, as the legislature's mandate had expired, new elections had to be held. Tired of the endless bickering of political life, and missing the opportunity to take part in the glorious deeds of our armies, my father declared that he would no longer serve as a deputy and wished to return to active military service. Events served him well. When the new chambers convened, there was a change in the ministry. General Bernadotte became Minister of War. He had promised my father he would send him to the army of the Rhine, and my father was preparing to go to Mainz when the Directory, having learned of General Schere's defeat in Italy, replaced him with General Joubert, who commanded the 17th Military Division in Paris, now the 1st. With that post now vacant, and its high political importance requiring a capable and firm man, the Directory, through the Minister of War, offered the command to my father. Although my father had left the legislature specifically to return to the army, he refused the Paris command. But Bernadotte, showing him the already signed service letter and telling him that as a friend he urged him to accept, and as a minister he ordered him to do so, my father resigned himself. The next day, he went to establish himself at the general headquarters of the Paris division, then located on Quai Voltaire at the corner of Rue des Saints-Pères, a building since demolished to make way for several houses. My father appointed Colonel Ménard, an old friend, as chief of staff. I was delighted by all the military activity surrounding him. His headquarters were constantly filled with officers of all ranks. A squadron, a battalion, and 6 artillery pieces were stationed permanently in front of the building, and a flurry of orderlies came and went. It all seemed far more exciting to me than the Latin exercises and essays of Corrèze. France, and especially Paris, was then in great turmoil. A catastrophe was imminent. The Russians, commanded by the famous Suvorov, had just entered Italy, where our army suffered a major defeat at Novi. General-in-Chief Joubert had been killed. Victorious, Suvorov was marching toward our army in Switzerland, commanded by Masséna. We had few troops on the Rhine. The peace talks at Rastatt had broken down, and our ambassadors had been assassinated. All of Germany was once again arming against us. The Directory, having lost all respect and without troops or money to raise them, had just decreed a forced loan, which finally alienated all public support. The only remaining hope was in Masséna, who might stop the Russians and prevent them from invading France. The impatient Directory sent him courier after courier, ordering him to engage in battle. But the modern-day Fabius, not wanting to risk his country's salvation, waited for some blunder from his fiery opponent that would give him the chance to strike. Here follows an anecdote showing how little things sometimes determine the fate of nations and the glory of army commanders. The Directory, furious at Masséna's refusal to obey repeated orders to fight, decided to dismiss him. But fearing that the general-in-chief might ignore the dismissal if it was simply delivered by a courier, the Minister of War was ordered to send a staff officer to Switzerland to deliver Masséna's dismissal publicly and to give General Chérin letters officially appointing him to command the army. Minister Bernadotte confided this plan to my father, who opposed it, explaining how dangerous it was, on the eve of a decisive engagement, to remove a general in whom the army had full confidence and replace him with a man more familiar with office work than with leading troops in the field. Moreover, the military situation could change quickly. Therefore, the mission had to be entrusted to a man wise enough to assess the situation and who would not deliver the dismissal to Masséna on the eve or in the middle of a battle. My father convinced the minister to assign the task to Captain Gault, his aide-de-camp, who, under the pretext of checking if contractors had delivered the agreed number of horses, went to Switzerland with the authority to either deliver or withhold Masséna's dismissal and Chérin's appointment letters, depending on the circumstances. This was an immense responsibility placed in the hands of a simple captain. Captain Gault justified the trust placed in him. Arriving at the headquarters of the Swiss army 5 days before the Battle of Zurich, he saw that the troops had great confidence in Masséna, and that the general was calm and resolute. Certain of victory, Gault remained completely silent about his secret orders, attended the Battle of Zurich, and returned to Paris without Masséna ever knowing that the modest captain had held in his hands the power to deprive him of the glory of one of the century's greatest victories. Masséna's dismissal would likely have resulted in General Chérin's defeat, the entry of Russian troops into France, the Germans following behind, and perhaps even the upheaval of all Europe. General Chérin was killed at the Battle of Zurich, unaware of the government's intentions toward him. Although the victory at Zurich prevented the enemy from entering the interior of France, it gave the Directory only a fleeting boost. The government was collapsing on all fronts. No one had confidence in it. The finances were ruined. Vendée and Brittany were in full rebellion. The interior lacked troops. The south was in flames. The chambers were at odds with each other and with the executive. In short, the state was on the brink of ruin. All political leaders understood that major change was both necessary and inevitable. Yet, while they agreed on this point, they disagreed on the solution. The old Republicans, attached to the Constitution of Year 6, then in effect, believed that replacing a few members of the Directory would save the country. 2 directors were dismissed and replaced by Gauhier and Moulins, but this was only a weak palliative for the calamities threatening to overwhelm France. Anarchy continued to spread. Then, several directors, including the famous CAS, along with many deputies and the vast majority of the public, believed that saving France required placing the reins of government into the hands of a firm man already distinguished by his service to the state. It was also understood that this leader had to be a military figure with strong influence over the army, capable of reigniting national enthusiasm, restoring victory to our banners, and deterring foreign invasions. In saying this, they were clearly pointing to General Bonaparte. But he was still in Egypt, and the crisis was urgent. Joubert had just been killed in Italy. Masséna, though victorious and excellent in command, was not a political man. Bernadotte appeared neither capable enough nor wise enough to heal France. All reformers therefore turned to General Moreau, despite concerns about his weak character and ambiguous actions during the coup of 18 Fructidor. Nevertheless, due to lack of better options, he was offered leadership of the faction seeking to overthrow the Directory, with the promise of becoming head of state, either as president or consul. Moreau, though brave and competent in battle, lacked political courage and likely doubted his own abilities to navigate the chaos then engulfing France. Selfish and indolent, he cared little for his country's future and preferred the peace of private life to political turmoil. He declined the offer and retired to his estate at Grosbois to indulge in his beloved pastime, hunting. Abandoned by their preferred choice, Sieyès and those seeking governmental change, lacking both strength and popularity, to succeed without the powerful sword of a general who could rally the army to their cause, turned to General Bonaparte. Sieyès, then president of the Directory and leader of the initiative, flattered himself that once Bonaparte was in power, he would focus only on organizing and leading the armies, leaving the governance of the state to Sieyès, who would be the soul of the regime, while Bonaparte remained merely a nominal chief. The outcome would prove just how wrong he was. Filled with this idea, Sieyès, through the Corsican deputy Salicetti, sent a secret and trustworthy agent to Egypt to inform General Bonaparte of the dire state in which France found itself, and to propose that he come and take the head of the government. Since he had no doubt that Bonaparte would resolutely accept and promptly return to Europe, Sieyès did everything in his power to ensure the execution of the coup d'etat he was planning. It was easy for him to convince his fellow director, Roger Ducos, that power was slipping from their grasp day by day, and that, with the country on the brink of complete disorganization, both public good and private interest required them to participate in the establishment of a strong government in which they would find positions far less precarious and far more advantageous. Roger Ducos promised his support for the proposed changes, but the three other directors, Barras, Gauhier, and Moulins, refused to relinquish power. Sieyès and the leaders of his faction then resolved to proceed without them and to sacrifice them when the planned event occurred. However, even with General Bonaparte present, it was difficult, or at the very least dangerous, to change the constitution, overthrow the Directory, and establish a new government without the support of the army, especially the division stationed in Paris. To be able to count on that force, it was essential to secure the Minister of War and the commander of the 17th Military Division. President Sieyès therefore tried to win over Bernadotte and my father by having several deputies, friends loyal to Sieyès' cause, sound them out. I later learned that my father responded to the veiled proposals made to him by the cunning Sieyès by saying, "It is true that the misfortunes of the country demand a prompt remedy, but having sworn to uphold the Constitution of Year 6, I will not use the authority that my command gives me over the troops of my division to lead them in overthrowing that Constitution." He then went to Sieyès, handed in his resignation as commander of the Paris division, and requested an active command elsewhere. Sieyès hastily granted his request. So eager was he to remove a man whose firmness in carrying out his duties might ruin the projected coup d'etat. Minister Bernadotte followed my father's example and was replaced by Dubois-Crancey. President Sieyès was, for several days, quite embarrassed about naming a successor to my father. Eventually, he handed command of Paris to General Lefebvre, who, having recently been wounded in the army of the Rhine, was at that time in the capital. Lefebvre was a former sergeant of the French Guards, a brave soldier and a good field general when closely guided, but extremely gullible and entirely unaware of France's political situation. Thus, with some cleverly placed words like glory, homeland, and victory, one could make him do whatever one pleased. He was just the kind of Paris commander Sieyès wanted, and Sieyès did not even bother to win him over or warn him of what was expected, so certain was he that on the day of the coup, Lefebvre would not resist General Bonaparte's influence or the flattery of the Directory's president. He had judged Lefebvre accurately, for on the 18th of Brumaire, Lefebvre placed all the troops of his division under General Bonaparte's command when the latter marched against the Directory and the councils to overthrow the existing government and create the consulate. This earned General Lefebvre the Emperor's great favor. He was later named Marshal, Duke of Danzig, Senator, and showered with wealth. I have briefly recounted these events because they explain the reasons that led my father to Italy and had such great influence on both his destiny and mine. After handing over his command to General Lefebvre, my father returned to settle at the residence on Faubourg Saint-Honoré and devoted himself solely to preparations for his departure to Italy. Very minor causes often influence the destiny of men. My father and mother were very close friends with Mr. Barairon, director of registration. One day, when they went to have breakfast at his home, they took me along with them. They spoke of my father's departure, of the good conduct of my two younger brothers. Finally, Mr. Barairon asked, "And Marcellin? What will you do with him?" "A sailor," my father replied. "Captain Sibyl has taken responsibility for him and will take him with him to Toulon." Then the kind Madame Barairon, to whom I have always been immensely grateful, remarked to my father that the French navy was in complete disarray, that the poor state of the finances did not allow it to be restored quickly, and that, besides, its inferiority compared to the British navy would keep it confined to port for a long time. She said that she could not understand why he, a divisional general in the army, would place his son in the navy instead of assigning him to a regiment where his father's name and service would surely help him succeed. She concluded by saying, "Take him to Italy, rather than send him to perish from boredom aboard a ship stuck in Toulon harbor." My father, who had for a moment been taken by Captain Sibyl's proposal, had too sound a mind not to appreciate Madame Barairon's reasoning. "Well then," he asked me, "do you want to come to Italy with me and serve in the army?" I threw my arms around his neck and accepted with a joy that my mother shared, for she had opposed my father's initial plan. Since there were no longer any military schools at that time, and one could only enter the army as a simple soldier, my father took me immediately to the municipality of the 1st arrondissement, at Place Beauvau, and had me enlisted in the 1st Regiment of Hussars, formerly Berceni, which was part of the division he was to command in Italy. It was the 3rd of September, 1799. My father took me to the tailor responsible for making the models for the Ministry of War and ordered a full hussar uniform of the 1st Regiment for me, along with all arms, equipment, and so forth. And thus, I became a soldier, a hussar. I was overwhelmed with joy, but my joy was troubled when, upon entering the residence, I realized it would deepen the sorrow of my brother Adolphe, 2 years older than I, who remained at school like a mere child. I then decided not to tell him about my enlistment until I could also let him know that I wished to spend the month remaining before my departure with him. I therefore asked my father to let me be reinstated near Adolphe at Sainte-Barbe until the day we set out for Italy. My father fully understood the reason behind this request. He even appreciated it greatly and took me the next day to see Mr. Lannes. Can you picture my arrival at the college? It was recess time. The games stopped immediately. All the students, big and small, surrounded me. Everyone wanted to touch some part of my outfit. In short, the hussar was a complete success. The day of departure came, and I separated from my mother and my 3 brothers with the deepest sorrow, despite the joy I felt in beginning my military career. That concludes the 3rd part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.